Welcome back to LogiSYM Asia Pacific 2021. And we're ready for the first keynote of the day. And I'm really looking forward to this one. The title of the keynote is quite intriguing. It's called When the World Changed. And to give us this keynote, we have Stephanie Krishnan, and Stephanie is the Research Director, Manufacturing Insights at IDC Asia Pacific. So to tell us all about When the World Changed, it's Stephanie Krishnan. So Steph, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bob, and thanks to everybody in the audience. I see we've got a good show today, and really appreciate your time here this morning. I know that coming to these events has become a little bit tiring, so hopefully we can do something a little bit different. We know that the world is constantly changing, and that's been the mantra, I think, for the past 10 years. But I think over the last 12 to 15 months, we've seen some, extraordinary events. But what is key here is that organizations are waking up to what supply chain professionals have instinctively known for years, right? That supply chains in control win. What I'll be exploring today is what is control and how supply chains must change to deliver quality, agility, and visibility. I'll be painting a picture for future supply chains and how that's actually impacting the future business strategies of organizations. I'll be talking about the enabling technology as well as, looking at some of the ways that we can get there. Now, key in our minds at the moment is obviously going to be COVID. My sympathies to our colleagues in India who are really struggling at the moment, and hope that you and your family and friends are well. Obviously in Singapore, where we're going into a new lockdown, and Malaysia is seeing record number of deaths. So this is really top of mind at the moment, and there are a number of difficulties that we're all facing, from personal to professional. We're seeing work from home implications, and of course we have to, we can't escape the implications that this has on supply chains. Additionally, this is all related, and that's why I brought all this together on this slide today. COVID has forced us to separate from each other. For many, isolation has been normalized with work from home circumstances. Shout out to all the parents who are dealing with new situations where they are teaching their students with home-based learning today. Work from home has increased demand for electronic devices, and we saw that happen very early in the coronavirus pandemic. But this demand is one of the key factors that has impacted the worldwide supply of semiconductors, which in turn has affected car production. We have lots in the US reporting that this summer they'll be going to market with only 10% of their lot capacity. So clearly there are indeed supply chain problems, and supply chain problems everywhere, to quote Toy Story there. But we do know that this is not the first time. From Thailand floods in 2011, we saw the Tianjin port explosion in 2015, which impacted supply chains coming out of China, causing rebooking of freight and putting supply chains on hold for a while. Trade tensions, which began escalation in 2016 and are continuing as we see this less resolution to tariffs and infrastructure that is forcing organizations to rethink their supply chains. This has had an increasingly global impact. And then, of course, the global pandemic. Now, up until this point, the disruptions that we've seen have themselves been localized or between certain parties, but the nature of our global supply chains has actually increased the impact of this. Then coming into COVID-19, we're actually seeing that the events in themselves have become increasingly globalized in nature, such as COVID, or an impact, such as the Suez Canal blockage that we saw early this year. And of course, we don't expect this to be the last. So supply chain professionals are actually having to embark on a balancing act to support the operations. This is forcing organizations, and these circumstances are forcing organizations to take a detour from their long-term business strategies to make short-term adaptations in response to the post-COVID marketplace dynamics. And this is also in turn changing long-term business strategies as the world changes. So let me walk you through a couple of short-term adaptations that are within the context of adapted long-term strategies. We're seeing increased supplier diversification to build in redundancy as organizations seek to find ways to ensure supply. However, what is happening is organizations are then moving from global supply chains to consider regional industry ecosystems to adapt to their changing geopolitical landscapes. We're also seeing increased supplier engagement, and this is to build stronger relationships to ensure supply as well as increased transparency in supply partners. And this is to make sure that alerts are received when disruption occurs. And this is resulting in increased engagement and increased visibility. And this allows organizations to have greater control and agility, resulting in greater integration and control between supply chain partners, allowing for supply chain orchestration, which is ultimately becoming the goal. Inventory redundancy is a typical go-to when supply chain risk is increased, and we're seeing hoarding in supply chains already in order to create that redundancy. This is occurring in everything from semiconductors to chemicals and cardboard as supply chain uncertainty prevails. However, moving to a perspective of resilient lean, where visibility and information replaces inventory, supply chains are able to get back to reduced inventory levels to lower costs and pass on that savings to their customers. And of course, sustainability, and it's coming to the fore with organizations focusing on energy and waste reduction in the short term, as it has the dual advantage of being able to mitigate costs as well as provide environmental benefits. But in the long term, organizations are seeing a need to move towards closed loop product design as they seek to ensure waste from products is reduced to near zero and impact on the environment is reduced to ensure carbon neutrality. I'll now go through each of these in a little bit more detail, and I'll do this with some insights into IDC Futurescape predictions, as well as some statistics that we are seeing from the field. And the first of these I'll talk about is the rise of the regionalized ecosystems. Now, IDC predicts that by 2024, 50% of manufacturers will have invested in industrial IoT and business-to-business collaborative network ecosystems to support reshoring or onshoring of strategic supply to align with nationalistic government policy. Now, industrial nationalism is not new, but it's characterized by nationalistic government policy that leans towards protectionist stance, protecting local economies or creating a requirement or a preference for a form of manufacturing or value add to occur locally. And this position has typically been seen in industries involving food supply or pharmaceuticals, but is also apparent in industries where countries have or want to develop areas of comparative advantage. Leaders may seek to shore up capabilities in related ecosystems, such as electronics manufacturing or industrial machinery, for example, to mitigate what they perceive as a national security risk. Now, we've seen Industry 4.0 policy trends in the region that are starting to support this, with funding supporting those industries where companies do seek to shore up a competitive advantage. Now, to address this, manufacturers are seeking to diversify geographically and build up a factory network model that may consist of a network of small factories close to demand, or where ecosystem partners customize the final product on demand. This is requiring increasing complexity, and organizations need to build up the requisite systems to support this. Now, with these options that are being considered to diversify risk, organizations are considering things like a China +1 diversification strategy, which would have them relocating part of their manufacturing and supply chains. Now, while onshoring to Europe or the US has been a popularly written about option, realistically, the rest of Asia are going to be beneficiaries from these considerations. 64% of Asia Pacific, excluding Japan and China manufacturers, are diversifying their factory network models over the next 3 to 5 years. Now, this is not China, as China has taken a particularly nationalistic stance and seeking up to increase their own capabilities here, and will be building, the indications that we have is that they will be building, continuing to build networked models within China, but not necessarily outside of China. However, taking China aside, diversification in this regard does not, especially in the short term, mean relocating factories or building new factories. Rather, it means cultivating ecosystems that support diversified strategies. And this includes things like significant outsourcing of production to suppliers in low-cost cities, modularizing platforms with centrally produced goods with manufacturers or suppliers or distributors, customizing final products on demand. And of course, finally, getting to a point where they do build up a network of small factories close to demand and focused on local products. The implications for supply chain professionals, of course, is that this comes with local sourcing, local increased transportation and network complexity, as well as being able to build up the capabilities that are going to feed manufacturing production lines and ensure requisite goods, the resulting goods are distributed. However, who's in control of these particular networks? Now, we do every month we do a enterprise resiliency and spending survey, WAVE survey, and we look at manufacturers and transportation companies. Now, the transportation company sample size is quite small, but we do have a trend here that indicates that transportation companies do actually see themselves more as an orchestrator or partner in these ecosystem activities, whereas manufacturers see themselves more as a participant in the ecosystem activity. So we're actually seeing a trend where even though these ecosystems are developing, in the short term, organizations are relying on their transportation partners to develop these ecosystems. And we'll talk a little bit more about how this is coming together in a couple of examples after the next section. Now, the next thing we're seeing is supply chain as a driver, and this is being pushed to pushed to ensure that we have visibility, and organizations are actually seeking to orchestrate their supply chains. By 2025, half of all manufacturers will have extended visibility to Tier 3 supply, enabling more agile supply chains and ensuring a 60% reduction in the impact of supply-side disruptions, according to our IDC predictions. Now, this is not a new concept, but increasing frequency of disruption in the supply chain has intensified the focus on supply chain reliability. So where is the focus for visibility in the supply chain? All right. While most supply chains have good visibility into the first tier of their suppliers, an equally significant number lose that visibility as subsequent tiers of supply are considered. If multiple Tier 1 suppliers are beholden to a single Tier 2 supplier, then a disruption or a business interruption of that supplier means that all of the Tier 1 will be affected. And we've seen this happen over the last 12 months. In Asia Pacific, 67% of manufacturers are looking to increase visibility across the end-to-end supply chain. So these disruptions are not good enough, and manufacturers are starting to realize this and are looking to their supply chains to make this happen. We need to make sure that we have cooperation in a world where many tiers of supply must work in concert to ensure reliable supply. While supply diversification is cited frequently as a way to mitigate disruptions and increase supply chain agility, visibility into those tier end supplies may actually make a more substantial impact. The next few years must bring a substantial improvement in tier end visibility, and as a critical element to overall supply chain resiliency, it will reduce the effect of supply chain disruptions by 50% by 2025. Now, organizations that are doing this are usually using control towers, and this is allowing organizations to adapt from global industry supply chains to regional industry ecosystems. Control towers bring together a number of capabilities. Now, in this diagram, we see that technology supports the ability to see, decide, and act. C is visibility, and it's a critical enabler for supply chains. We can only react to what we know or see. In IDC's 2020 supply chain survey, 98% of Asia-Pacific respondents recognize the importance of and are prioritizing efforts to improve visibility, particularly, as we saw earlier, end-to-end supply chain visibility. Organizations need to decide. They need to have data-driven decision capabilities, and these are central to modern control towers and ecosystem orchestration. And of course, being able to act. And act is being able to have that delivered from an information perspective, and this is done through cloud capabilities that are delivered out to supply chain partners, but also to make sure that the physical goods move and being able to make sure that the information is provided in order to facilitate that movement, because the faster the information flows, the faster the goods can flow. Now, although there is a tendency to think of the modern control tower as a single monolithic entity, the reality is that it's an aggregation of many different control towers, each doing something specifically within the supply chain or the broader business. This does not mean that supply chains must invest in a whole series of control towers, rather that the modern control tower will have different flavors that can be configured as necessary. For example, there will be a logistics control tower facility that ingests the appropriate data in order to facilitate the next best actions related to fulfillment and transportation tasks. And this will obviously be prioritized for those organizations that see this as a pressure for the immediate. Then there is inventory control towers, and this is particularly relevant in the present moment as companies struggle to understand what inventory they have, where it is, and how quickly it can be deployed, and where it is in the entire, not just in their organization, but across the entire ecosystem. An inventory control tower would be solely tasked with visibility into inventory across the entire supply network, analysing the implications of those positions and either recommending or taking the correct action. Now, collectively putting together these control towers and enabling interoperability between them are going to allow greater coordination and the ability to orchestrate supply chains more effectively. Now, organisations such as Decathlon, Toll, Agility, and many others are starting to put together these supply chain control towers. We are seeing a trend that, as per the previous slide, previous section, that transportation companies tend to be leading in this, but manufacturers are starting to realise that they do need to take control of their supply chain and are looking to integrate with their supply chain partners rather than rely solely on their infrastructure. Now, resilient lean is another area where we are seeing organisations invest. I particularly raised it with regards to inventory stockpiling. A lot of organisations are seeking to go against their lean policies and in this current time seek to bring up inventory stockpiles in reaction to this. While this does create levels of redundancy, it doesn't necessarily ensure that we're going to have good cost effectiveness, and we are seeing prices rise as a result. Now, for those who have both studied and operated supply chains for decades, we've always talked about the importance of visibility, agility, and resiliency. But these terms are now on the tip of everybody's tongue and are taking on a profoundly more important role in an increasingly disruptive world. Although resiliency is not something that can be achieved overnight, there are things that can be done in the shorter term to better understand the drivers of demand volatility and allow companies to better match supply with demand. When both supply and demand are highly volatile, supply chain resiliency is critical. Now, by the end of 2021, according to IDC, 60% of all manufacturing supply chains will have invested in the technology and business processes necessary for true resiliency, resulting in productivity improvements of 25%. Organisations are starting to implement capabilities that are allowing them to determine the inventory that they have on hand, the transportation routes that need to be taken, forecasting and planning decisions that are allowing them to build in that resiliency. And this is only being done through the availability of information. As we've said before, supply chain visibility is integral to this, and we're seeing that here that supply chain visibility reduces risk. In Asia Pacific, according to our last supply chain survey, 58% of Asia Pacific manufacturers reported that overall supply chain visibility is the focus for risk mitigation. Interestingly enough, in ASEAN, another area for focus for risk mitigation is actually sustainability, and we'll get to that point shortly. Visibility increases resiliency. Supply chain resiliency will allow companies to react more quickly to both internal and external events and speed time to recovery for larger disruptions. IDC expects that supply chain resiliency will have a material impact on overall productivity. Now, for companies, they need to ensure that the necessary visibility and agility are enabled for true resiliency. This does not necessarily mean going to a full control tower. It means starting small with integrating with immediate suppliers and then asking them to integrate with their suppliers and passing information along the supply chain. Having 20% or 30% increased visibility is obviously going to be better than zero. And being able to build on that visibility over time is going to increase organisational resiliency. So while control towers may be the key, it's important to ensure that we walk before we run and able to build up that information visibility over time to ensure that we know where our goods are and what's happening with them. So organisations do need to sell, or those interested in ensuring this need to sell within the organisation the idea of technology as an augmentation of people. The workforce is a key enabler here, and as we've seen with AI, past models have not necessarily worked well because they've relied on reliable patterns and continued operation, whereas we've seen massive disruptions recently that are throwing some of those models. So that the augmentation of people to technology is key. So we're not saying, throw out people and implement the technology. However, it is important to ensure that people understand the technology and what benefits this can do so that they're able to see what is happening close to real time and then be able to actuate on it. An example of this is we're seeing organisations pull together planning information from their supply partners and their demand partners and reduce their lead time or reduce their planning cycles from cycles of 13 weeks down to cycles of 5 weeks down to cycles of 1 week. This is so that they can actually have the agility to make the decisions that are required. However, having the visibility in the data that's going to support those decisions is key. Integrating both existing and new and existing supply chain systems so that all relevant data and insights can be combined for optimal resiliency is also important. Old systems are able to be upgraded with capabilities such as robotic process automation, RPA, which we've featured here at LogiSYM a few years now. Adding those capabilities or augmenting those capabilities with legacy systems is possible, but those systems need to be evaluated and integrated with the new supply chain systems so that those insights can be obtained. And redefining the underlying business processes to ensure that the data and insights generated are seamlessly integrated into the supply chain systems. Creating a culture of trust around the information that's being provided and having people actually make decisions based on that data is essential to ensure that visibility is achieved and that decisions are made that reduce the risk of the organisation. Now, organisations are seeking to replace inventory with information, and this is key to making sure that we do not have huge stockpiles of inventory to avoid costs going up and to avoid overstocking and situations where we do have excess, which will have implications for supply chains in 3 to 5 years' time. I'm sure warehouse managers are all groaning at the idea of having additional stock that they know may be sitting around in their warehouse for the next few years. One way to do that is to ensure that we do have that visibility into our own capabilities as well as our supply partners so that we are actually able to replace that inventory with information, being able to come up with capabilities that are allowing us to draw on our supply chain ecosystem and creating local and regionalized capabilities so that we have partners that are going to be able to support our ability to deliver to our customers. And last and certainly not least is sustainability. Now, sustainability has really come to the fore over the last 12 to 15 months. What started with a movement with a young girl from Europe has certainly been raised in awareness from a business perspective. Companies have changed at an unprecedented rate over the last 12 months, and this is because of scarcity of resources. The need to innovate has brought about a new awareness about scarcity and about sustainability. For example, the drop in emissions worldwide caused by crisis constraints show that sudden change is possible and that manufacturers must reevaluate how they operate, not only from an internal operational point of view, but also within the ecosystem. Transportation companies are also seeing the impact. With reduced emissions from transportation, we're actually seeing that this is actually having an impact on worldwide emissions. And as a result, we are seeing supply chains having reduced CO2 footprints, and this is something that we'd like to see continue. Recent IDC research shows that 1 in 2 manufacturers see COVID-19 as triggering a positive impact on their sustainable development goals. And this includes climate change, diversity, inclusion, and responsible production. IDC research also shows that those organisations that are both digital and sustainable have been outperforming their peers financially, both from a revenue and profit perspective. To prepare for this next normal and future periods of uncertainty and disruption, manufacturers need to accelerate their digital transformation efforts in convergence with their sustainability goals, and this extends to supply chain partners. Focusing on environmental sustainability will require organisations to have an end-to-end view of all the aspects of their delivery mechanisms, from raw materials to finished goods, and in-service usage all the way to disposal and recycling. And this is called the circular economy. So IDC predicts that facing increased disruptions, manufacturers will digitally transform and accelerate sustainable innovation to improve supply chain operations from concept to commerce, increasing revenue by 20% in 2025. Now, we're seeing these implications happen from short-term gains to long-term sustainability. So immediate areas, as I highlighted in the beginning of this presentation, is looking at things like energy efficiency and waste reduction, because they have immediate implications on profit and cost. Sorry, cost and profit. Energy efficiency is the #1 area of focus, as organisations see a direct impact on their bottom line. And as I said earlier, it has the dual capability of also having a contribution towards ESG goals. Similarly, we're seeing organisations are seeing a significant impact on sustainability initiatives as a result of digital transformation. And digital efforts are actually supporting sustainability outcomes. I was recently pulled up by somebody who said, well, you know, the IT industry is actually contributing to 1 to 1.5% of IT emissions, and that's true. However, it's also contributing to 20% of the solutions that are going to 20% of the emissions reductions through solutions that are going to allow this reduction to occur. So investment in IT, while it does have some impact on the planet itself, it does actually contribute to solutions, efficiency, waste reduction, optimization, better asset utilization that are increasing not just sustainability outcomes, but also business outcomes. Now, as an organisation that does this, that leverages sustainability and their ecosystems, there are many that do this on a large scale, and organisations are, looking to large companies to see this. But I thought I would call up a slightly smaller company, and this is Emma Lewisham, which is a New Zealand makeup brand. Now, they partner with waste management company TerraCycle to enable traceability in the reverse logistics process when recycling beauty product packaging. Now, this closed loop approach to packaging in their supply chain is a start. Starting small and bringing sustainability and the ecosystem together allows for organisations to obtain the benefits of a closed loop supply chain through ecosystem partners, enabling capabilities such as recycling and ensuring traceability. So being able to account that back and then contribute that to their reporting. We are seeing organisations needing to report on sustainability, and this is largely mandated by rules out of the EU. We've seen new rules being tabled in New Zealand, which is actually mandating that banks report on their investments. And SGX, ASX are also requiring, report or explain policies that are saying to organisations, you need to tell us what you're doing in this regard, or explain why you're not doing anything or reporting on it. So there is a financial drive, a financial imperative for sustainability, but also a regulated one by governments, which are requiring organisations to act. The financial imperative should at least be a motivation for businesses to consider this, and the supply chain is one of the key areas where we can actually have a great impact, and organisations are seeking to take advantage of that. So to wrap up, I'd like to come back to the balancing act that I proposed earlier. We are seeing organisations and supply chains adapt to the difficulties that we're seeing in our business and across the globe. But this is aligning in long-term strategies with regional industry ecosystems, supply chain orchestration, a move towards resilient lean and closed-looped product design. However, in making this move, companies do need to assess their digital debt. That what systems do they have in place at the moment, and how are they being used, and where is it worth replacing those systems, or at least considering interim technologies that are going to allow those systems to be able to expand over time, and putting in a roadmap to ensure that they're able to continue this journey in order to support their long-term business strategies is central to this. A roadmap allows organisations to determine what are the short-term adaptations that they need to address today, but implement technology capabilities that are going to allow them to support long-term business strategies, and work out which technologies do need to be replaced and which can be augmented in order to facilitate that. I'd like to thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure. I'd like to tell everybody to stay safe, and please enjoy LogiSYM. I hope it will be of a great benefit to you. There's a lot of good panels coming up, and stay tuned tomorrow at 11:15 for my next one. Thank you very much.